Welcome to An Honorable Profession, a podcast giving America hope since 2018. I'm Ryan Coonerty. Along with Debbie Cox Bultan of the New Deal, I'm lucky enough to be your co-host. An Honorable Profession is a New Deal Leaders podcast. The New Deal is an organization that supports the next generation of American leaders. From attorneys generals, to state senators, to mayors, to school board members, these are the people that are pushing policies and politics that will respond to climate change, rebuild our economy, address racial injustice, and restore our democracy. These are incredibly talented people who have dedicated themselves to public service when their country and their communities needed it the most. Check out newdealleaders.org to see what I'm talking about.
Faith in our government and in our elected officials has reached record lows in recent years. In 2023, trust in government plummeted to 16%. And in 2024, 49% of Americans believed that the very foundation of our government, our democracy, is no longer working. Government has become synonymous with words like inefficient, outdated, broken, and ineffective. It's imperative to our country's future, for delivering the services that people rely on, and for preserving and strengthening our democracy to actually start getting shit done. Today, we're kicking off a new series, An Honorable Profession, How Government Can Get Shit Done. We'll explore how we can make government work better for the American people, despite outdated systems, unresponsive government, and bureaucratic processes. We'll be talking with esteemed political scientists and policy experts, renowned authors and thought leaders, and the elected officials working on the pragmatic, thoughtful solutions that will solve challenges facing communities across the country. To start the series, here's New Deal's CEO and co-host of An Honorable Profession, Debbie Cox Bultan, in conversation with Jennifer Pahlka.
We're thrilled to open our new series today with Jennifer Pahlka, who has decades of experience as a leader in civic tech. Jen founded and led Code for America, which helps state and local governments use technology to improve government services. And she served as U.S. Deputy Chief Technology Officer under President Obama. She's also the author of the terrific book, Recoding America, Why America is Failing in the Digital Age and What We Can Do Better. With DOGE as a backdrop, Jen and I talk about the factors that too often make government too slow and ineffective, and what can be done, not to indiscriminately and dangerously dismantle government, but to focus on outcomes and make government work for everyone. Jen has a ton of practical and specific advice for elected officials, from prioritizing civil service reform to investing in digital and data infrastructure, as well as how to deproceduralize, as she calls it, and the importance of focusing on implementation and measuring results as much as we do about passing new legislation. Her message for Democrats, as she laid out recently in the New York Times, if you're mad about what Mr. Musk's initiative is doing to the institutions of government, it's time to go on the offensive and reform it. I hope you enjoy our conversation. All right, Jen Pahlka, welcome to An Honorable Profession.
Thanks for having me.
I have been both dreading this conversation and so excited to have this conversation, right?
That's a bad start.
That's a bad start. Because it's so, what's happening in our country is so jarring, so massive, so hard to get your head around. But I am so grateful to you for being here because, as I was saying before we got on camera, I think you're so singularly good at explaining to people, talking people through this. So I'm so grateful for your time and helping us make sense of it all. So as we talked about, you have a very long history in working very successfully in making government work better and thinking about this. And so I guess my first question to you as we look at, Trump kind of rode in here on a wave of, I'm going to make things work, government's not working, and really resonated with people. And that is a fair point. And so for people who have been like you, like me, working in government, in and around government, with a special sensibility to it, that we have a goal of making it work better. How do we respond, I guess, or what should we make of what Trump and DOGE and Elon Musk are doing in the name of kind of making government better, but really just kind of indiscriminately? What's the difference between kind of making government work better and what's happening at DOGE? I guess let's frame it that way.
Yeah, it's so hard to tease apart, and it's so multi-tentacled, sadly. But I think the first thing to do is to not lose sight of the fact that the problem they say they're solving, not that they are solving, is a real problem. And there are some instincts to sort of just defend. And I think if we defend that, we are defending a very unpopular status quo, and that's a bad place to be. Is the way they are trying to solve this problem, or even are they actually trying to solve the same problem I want solved? Is it the right way? Absolutely not. There may be some benefit to us in the long run, but it's certainly not how we go about it. Now, essentially, one of the major problems is that we have had a real accretion of policy and procedure over the years. It's so easy to add, you never subtract, right? The law, the policy, the regulation, the process, the forms, the steps that, and these things that are really just process take on the veneer of law. And so in bureaucracies, people will say, you must do this. This is legal. And it isn't necessarily. The law doesn't actually prescribe that procedure, but it's these many, many procedures that have been layered on over time that make it really hard for government to get stuff done in a timely manner and in a way that like normal people can see the results. So is that a real problem? Yes. Now, the way to do it is to very thoughtfully go through and sort of pick apart what is just process and could be changed, by a manager deciding it can be changed. What is regulation that needs to go through a notice and comment rulemaking process to be changed? And what is the law? And if the law is in the way, that is what we do. We go change that law to be updated for the 21st century, to be in line with the speed of government that we now think needs to happen. And, that's what, frankly, maybe it was naive of me to hope, but I kind of hoped if you had a DOGE that they would go in and say, oh, wow, some of these things need to be changed. Let's use the power that we have. They have a trifecta to go make the changes that need to be made so that we can operate at the speed and effectiveness and efficiency that we need to do. That's hard work, but it's the work that needs to be done. And it's a little different. It's a very different thing to come in and say, oh, we're, deleting an agency. It's a very different thing to come in and say, there's a law in our way and we're just going to ignore it.
Right.
That really gets at something that's core to our democracy. The thing about deleting an agency is that you're no longer talking about the how of government. You're in the what. And my world really is the how. Whatever you say the policy is, we had fantastic policies coming out of the Biden administration, and that's the what. But the how of it, how fast can we get it done? How effectively can we get it done? Can we get it done in a way that people feel the impact in their communities and say, oh yes, that Inflation Reduction Act, it made our community better. Here's how I can see it. That how really, really matters. And I think Democrats have to own that. What DOGE is doing is actually getting into the what in ways that are illegal.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. And you have this really great article or op-ed in the New York Times early February, people should check out, about how Democrats should respond to DOGE. Mm-hmm. And I think that you're exactly right. You kind of make this case that, and I think this is the problem Democrats we got ourselves into, right? Which is that we talk about the good government can do. And then when we talk about government, we tend to focus on passing bills and what we want to do, to your point, the what. And then there really has been, for lots of reasons that you've articulated in your book, and I want to dive into a little bit, you've articulated your book, you've articulated in that article about what those barriers to the implementation are, that these regulations have kind of been stacked on each other, that it's, and one of the things that's been frustrating about DOGE, though, has been that this there doesn't seem to be a conversation about what the outcomes we're trying to achieve are, that there's been this indiscriminate decision that actually the end all be all is to eliminate an agency, tear down or eliminate jobs, just for the sake of that, and then no kind of conversation about what government's actually going to deliver in the end. So I guess to your point about as Democrats think about this, I think we certainly cannot be on the side of not reforming government, not rooting out waste, fraud, and abuse, but also, and even just, but more importantly, just making it deliver better. I don't have any impression that they actually want to deliver government.
No, I think that's right. I mean, people have said to me, well, you've been doing government efficiency for a long time. And I'm like, I actually never called it that. We were talking about better government, but government that was easier to interact with, that treated you with more dignity and respect, that got outcomes that people need in their communities and that we need as a nation, whether that's, poverty alleviation or, building the new infrastructure that we need to decarbonize our economy. Those are all real outcomes. And I think if you do the work that needs to be done, the deproceduralization, the civil service work, the sort of closing the loop between policy and implementation, I could talk about in a little bit. If you do that work, it actually, a nice side effect of it is that it's more effective and more efficient.
Right. That's right.
I guess I'd say the efficiency is a good side effect. So like what I talked about before in terms of going through and streamlining procedures that have just accumulated over the years that slow us down. You get efficiency when you go for effectiveness.
Right.
If you go for effectiveness, if you go for efficiency first without a sense of what you're trying to be effective at, then you end up where we are today. Sadly.
Yeah, I think that's a really, really smart and succinct way to say it, and to explain to people what the difference is, right? Because again, I think that, I want to move to actually what we do about this, but, I think Trump, I can't not say, because we're talking soon after Trump's address to Congress, talking about for every regulation that we, do, we're going to eliminate 10. I think he's saying some things that are going to really resonate. I think that there's a very big disconnect between what is being said and what's actually happening in practice in terms of actually making government work.
And it was in Trump 1 too. I mean, he had the 1 in, 1 out or 1 in, 2 out regulation. And if you look at the academic surveys, there's actually not any reduction in regulation in his first term. And it's in some ways a silly, not a silly argument, but the American public is not counting regulations.
No, that's right.
They're not.
That's
what
right.
They are doing is having lived experiences of government that are sometimes good and sometimes bad. And the same regulation can be implemented in a way that is burdensome or invasive or insulting, or it can be implemented in a very effective, lightweight, sort of streamlined way. And it's not like you can't count them up and add the burden. You have to think about the design essentially of the interaction with the public or the business or whatever it is. And that's how we earn the trust back, is not just cutting regulation. It's looking at what's necessary for sure, getting rid of what we don't need for sure, but designing wonderful interfaces to government that keep the burden off of people and businesses and get the maximum benefit from those regulations.
Yeah, I love that. Do you the words you use, and you've used it once already here, is deproceduralization. One of the words you use a lot. Can you just explain to people what you mean by that?
Yeah, it is basically just acknowledging, and you can talk about process, you can talk procedure, you can talk about regulation. These are all sort of, sister concepts that are different, levels of a hierarchy. But essentially, it's looking at how the bureaucracy works and saying which of these procedures are actually necessary. And another way to talk about it, and I feel like Democrats are coming around to this, but it's sort of not been the squarely Democrat space, is that one of the problems with government right now is that we have an imbalance between go energy and stop energy. And I know this is like second grade language, but if you talk to somebody who works in a federal agency or a state or a local agency that is trying to get something done. I'll use, for example, the team that built Direct File at the IRS this last year. They're trying to build something that the public can use and deliver a new service for low-income people. That means they don't have to use, they don't have to pay a firm to file their taxes, and they are more guaranteed to get the credits that are available to them. This team is trying to do something, they're trying to build something. And like one is a common thing to hear from someone like, there's 6 of us trying to do the thing, and there's 60 of us trying to tell us what we can't do. I value guardrails. I value checklists. I would not get on a plane that like didn't have all of the stop energy, right? Like your plane only takes off when every one of those things on the checklist has been checked off.
Yeah.
Because we don't want to die, right?
Right.
It's really important. But you can, in government, have so many of those checklists and so many people who can veto something moving forward. So many people can call into question, do we have the authority to do this? Was this done right? That it feels maddeningly slow to actually get anything done, right?
Yeah.
And so you've got procedures and you've got people implementing those procedures. Some of them are necessary and we need to retain them. So, and in high risk environments, like getting a plane off the ground or like managing our nukes, like you want all those safeguards. You probably don't want to remove any of them, right?
Right.
But when we're like, say, launching something to the American public that's going to be really good, but like isn't going to kill anybody, right?
Right.
We need to rebalance that energy. We want to go remove the procedures where the benefit is no longer in line, the cost of them is no longer in line with the benefit that we're getting, and change the makeup of the workforce so that you have more people who are dedicated to building the thing and getting it out there and, reestablishing faith with the American public. Yeah. And fewer people and fewer procedures that are saying, no, let's hold this back. Let's not get this done.
Yeah. And I think that's a really good point about kind of the risk management, right? Of like, and that's one of the frustrations I think about what's happening right now is there doesn't seem to be that. It's the, oh my gosh, we fired the nuclear inspectors, let's bring them back in. There's no like rhyme or reason to like, oh, there's actually governments that does some really important things that are not just like run like a business. It's not just a bottom line. It's actually having to deliver safety, whether or not it costs or whatever it is. So, but if you're a state or local elected, who are largely our audience, and they're going to think about what you just said, can you drill a little deeper on like what advice would you give to them when they're thinking about designing something, when they're thinking about systems, like how can they make it easier for people to interact with government?
So there's really 4 things that we advise, and this works at any level of government. The first thing is and actually let me first contextualize it, because you did bring up this issue of passing laws but not really getting the output or the outcome that the public in your constituency is expecting.
Yeah.
One example, I recently moved to the DC area, but from California, we have passed over 100 bills to increase housing. Housing has not meaningfully budged, right?
Right.
So it of course people feel frustrated. Of course people are now looking to the person who says, yes, but I can fix this, right? So if you want a government that can actually achieve its policy goals, and that's sort of the framework I'm working with, you need to be able to hire the right people and fire the wrong ones. In many states and cities and counties, that is going to involve some sort of civil service reform. It may not be statutory reform, and it may be getting in there and understanding, why do we have San Francisco, I think recently was a 250-day hiring. An average.
It's just insane.
250 days to hire. Well, yes, You're not achieving your policy goals because you don't have the people you need.
Right.
A whole bunch of other thing in there, like how are you assessing people for their skills? Like, how are you managing your workforce? Are you able to fire underperformers? This is a big deal for Dems who are, we're obviously very proud of our relationships with the unions, but we really need to have it is part of the compact we have with the American public that we're going to spend those taxpayer dollars well. We're going to be able to manage that workforce. So that's the first thing. The second thing is reducing procedural bloat. So one of the things to add to that discussion is that we are now at a point where we have tools to do this that didn't exist before. Right. I am not a technology optimist. I don't think tech solves all problems. But LLMs actually are like great at going around, and you can feed just tons and tons statutes and regs and stuff into them, and they can help you figure out what no longer needs to be on the books. So there's just not all that volume of regulation you have to wade through. We partner with the Stanford Reg Lab, some great folks who have these custom LLMs. They're very smart. They're very careful about this. They have appropriate guardrails, right? But they've gone and looked at, they found dozens of boards and commissions in San Francisco that no one even knew existed anymore. Let's get those off the books. But they can also help with things that are going to probably be a little bit more controversial, like, what steps can we take out in this process, et cetera. Another good example of that, unemployment insurance. In the state of New Jersey, it's going to be different in each state, 7,119 pages of active regulations.
Oh my gosh.
Of course, we can't scale those systems up in times of high need and scale them back down. They're too fragile, right? They're too complex. We can now go through and say what in there is de minimis, what in there is conflicting, what in there is just vestigial. How can we, create a set of rules and regulations that should run unemployment insurance in 2025? Like, how would you simplify this that just doesn't have the 90 years of legacy that's accreted and accrued? It would be impossible. It's very, very hard to do that without the help of LLMs, but we do now have those tools. So let's do that work. If you're listening to this and you're interested in having us come help, reach out to me, because we're looking for jurisdictions to show how this works. And we have a couple we could talk about soon.
Wonderful.
The third thing is investing in digital and data infrastructure. To do any of these things, we have to see what we're able to do. We have to have the tech talent and the design talent to build these interfaces to government that people like using. They can make smart decisions for you about, do you need 212 questions on your SNAP form? No, you don't. Let's design something that really works for people, and let's have the back end that delivers. And then the last piece that I think is the most abstract, but probably the most important, is closing the loop between policy and implementation. So right now it sort of works in a sort of a waterfall method. You pass a law or policy and it gets handed off to successive layers of a bureaucracy. By the time it's actually being implemented on the ground, by folks that are so distant from the folks who passed the law, a game of telephone has occurred. They don't quite know what the real intention was. It's been burdened with lots of procedure. It's now more about the process than it is about the outcome. And they're not able to sort of loop back and say, is what we're doing what you intended? Is this working? Are we getting the results that we were hoping to get? And we have to really fundamentally think differently about the relationship between the executive and legislative branches in order to build these tight feedback loops, so that by the time you're actually, hitting the ground, we kind of have tested things, we know what works, and we're confident that we're going to get there, and that we keep having those feedback loops all the way along. But right now, most legislators are like, I passed the law, it's someone else's job now. I'm moving on to the next piece of legislation, or, the next bill that I want to introduce. That's a really big mind shift, but I would absolutely encourage anybody here in the legislative branch to shift their thinking. I think your voters will actually reward you for it, for caring more about the outcome than the bill. And that is going to mean you spend your days and your staff spend your days on fundamentally different things, but it will pay off.
Yeah, well, and that's an interesting thing, because I think for a lot of elected officials, there's been a little bit of a using how many bills you introduced or passed as the measurement for success. And so I think that's a really interesting point, to be able to talk instead about what you delivered, because that's really, to your point, that's what people are looking for. Is that when you talk?
Almost all of my friends, just regular voters, people not in government. Do you have any, do you vote for somebody on the basis of the number of bills they passed? They're like, I have no idea. They don't even know.
Right.
They don't know. But the reason that we introduce those bills, or your audience here introduces those bills, is because they get attention. And what we have to do is create the mechanisms and affordances that give you the same kind of attention from the press, from the community, from academics, from community groups, that you get the same attention for the follow-up that you do for introducing the bills. And I think that's the work that the world around, the civil service groups will do that. The good government groups will do that. Academia can do that. You can train the media to pay attention to these things. Yeah. But you have to challenge that conventional wisdom that the reason that you're doing this is either for votes or attention, because it's not getting you the votes. And there's a different way to get attention that will also get outcomes, and your people will reward you for that.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think, when last time I saw you, you were very gracious to come speak to us at our conference right after the election, and we're talking about this and reinventing government or reforming government, and also joining us there were the oversight folks over the Levin Center. Right. And I think they're so great. And I think that's, I do wonder about kind of this polarized environment that we find ourselves in. And I think when people think about oversight, they think about some of the, really performative stuff that happens in Washington. It's not really oversight, right? It's really just, people trying to make a point. It's outrage. So what, if anything, can you say about, kind of about that piece, about keeping, about holding ourselves, frankly, accountable for what we said we were going to do. And, whether it's the process or whether it's the, changing the environment, the political environment around that, like what should people think about when they're doing that piece specifically of it?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think this does fall into the bucket of oversight, but not the oversight people think of. It's not the hearing where you scream at the bureaucrats.
Yeah.
Once you're at the point of screaming at the bureaucrats, you've lost and we've lost and the public has lost, right? Oversight in the sense of building relationships with the agencies and departments that have to implement your laws and policies and building trust with them. There's a very, there's an extreme lack of trust, especially in Congress, but I think this is true in states and cities as well, to say, no, we really actually want you to talk to us about how this is going. And most importantly, we want to hear about the barriers. What is keeping you from being able to do this? Because almost always, what they'll say to me, they don't want to say it to the, to electeds, is what's keeping us is the other bill that you gave us. Not that it's just competing for time, but all of these other things that you've asked us to do over time that are the guardrails and the safeties and you put in a whole bunch of laws around, procuring from only certain kinds of vendors, for instance. Well, guess what? That adds months to our processes. Is that more important? Or is it more important to get this thing done than you gave us just now? And if we can actually get trust in that dialogue and you go, oh yeah, well actually, I kind of do want you to deliver on that. So can we actually maybe go back and think about this, procurement thing or this other thing? Nobody can do everything. And you're only going to know how your bureaucracy is bogged down if you actually build the relationship and start to listen and ask not, why haven't you done this in time? But what is holding you back and how can we remove barriers for you? And that has to happen long before the big failures that you're yelling at people about. I think it's also important to say in this time of DOGE and the incredible animosity that certain folks are showing to public servants, that the biggest thing that you can do as an elected official is raise up and thank bureaucrats when they do something good. I'm not saying randomly do it, though. Random hugs are probably really valued right now.
Right.
But I told these stories in my book, Reading Code for America. Recoding America. Code for America is my old nonprofit. There's one woman in particular, her name is Yadira Sanchez, who's in chapter 10 of the book. And she's just a badass. She is at the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services. And she is seeing this sort of cascade of rigidity that we call it, where, this law needs to be implemented, but they're starting to implement it in a very rigid way, which is going to get a very perverse outcome from what the lawmakers intended. And so she sort of fights and goes, fights the lawyers and fights the policy team and says, we've got to do this in a way that's user-centered, that's going to work for people. In this case, it's doctors. And she wins, and they ship this implementation of this law, MACRA. The implementation is on time, it's under budget, and doctors, instead of fleeing the program, keep calling to say, I must be on the wrong website. This is too easy to use. This is great. I have now greater trust and faith in Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services because of this fantastic program. But people would say to me, you have this wonderful woman, Yadira Sanchez, who you outline in the book. She must get so much praise. Or they would say, she did things that sounded maybe not quite exactly what Congress had told her to do. Isn't she going to get fired? Well, if you like what Yadira did, which was have an opinion, which was let's make this work for users, and fought to make this program better, the number one thing you could do is find someone like her and give her an award or have a hearing that's about how great a job she did and how great a job her team did.
Yeah.
Because all bureaucrats ever hear is criticism. And imagine, you want to, why are bureaucracies risk averse? Imagine a world in which you only ever got feedback that was negative. Yeah. That creates risk aversion.
Yeah.
Think about the dynamics of risk aversion and be the change you want to see. Do the things that reduce the risk aversion of the bureaucracies that implement your laws. And most of that is about creating relationships and lifting up the kind of behavior, finding and lifting up the kind of behavior you want to see, and thanking public servants for the work they do.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. I've got your book right here. I should just flag that. Here's this amazing book. But I'm so glad you said that, Jen, because I was gonna say that you end that book with a really simple and really powerful line, or in the last paragraph, the government is just the name we give for things we want to do together. And I feel like one of the things that I'm most worried about in the middle of all this DOGE is exactly what you're talking about, is essentially this reinforcement that government over there, which is not us, government is us, right? I mean, there's some weird thing over there called government, and the people who are in it are somehow the problem, the enemy. If we just get rid of them, everything will be fine. And so I just couldn't, just going to double click on your suggestion. It's a great suggestion for our leaders and for others around the country, just to not only hug, which is a good one, but to lift up and to because there are these stories of successes. You have a lot of them in your book too, about not her, but other people who are making these things work well. And we not only should lift them up as a thank you, but also as an example of what other people can do, I think. Yeah. So I couldn't agree with you more. Before I lose you, I want to this is called an honorable profession. And we often like to talk to people about kind of how they got into this business. You have had such an interesting trajectory to start Code for America, which you've mentioned, and then to go into the White House and actually, ironically, help launch the organization that now DOGE has taken over and renamed DOGE. It was the Department of Digital Services. It is now DOGE. You
had to mention that, didn't you?
I'm sorry. I found it. I didn't know that until I started looking at this. I was like, that is fascinating. Yeah. Why did this become so important to you? You're obviously so passionate. You've dedicated your whole life in making government work better, being more effective. Where did this passion come from?
Well, my dad is a teacher. My mom was a nurse midwife. So I think I always had that sort of sense of, serving the public. But my first job out of college, I worked for a child welfare agency. And then I left and I ended up coming back, and I ended up in tech just because I needed a job. I'd been traveling. And, I got to be around the tech industry when Facebook and Twitter and Google were all these little baby companies, and we were putting them on stage at our Web 2.0 events. And it was sort of this idea of Web 2.0 was very interesting for a while. And then it kind of became a little bit boring as it just became all these companies trying to use the buzzwords. And right around then, Barack Obama had BarackObama.com, run by Blue State Digital. And there was this idea that, wow, the internet is helping this guy get elected. But once he is elected, will this new participatory web be able to help him govern better? Right. And that was a very different question. And so it all kind of came together for me at that time that here we had all this incredibly generative and creative Web 2.0 technology that's changing the world. But I could think back to working at the child welfare agency and saying, if we can have, magical technology that changed the world, the best the technology industry has to offer should be going to things like child welfare. Yeah. That's the thing that matters most. And then we started this Gov 2.0 brand. So I started going to DC to understand how government did technology. And let me just say it's an understatement to say the best the technology industry had to offer was not going into government at the time.
Yeah.
And the systems that run things that are critical, like child welfare or SNAP or stuff at the Department of Defense, or the implementation of the Inflation Reduction Act, or the permitting systems that need to work for us to have more housing, right? Those are not great technology systems.
Yeah.
And they're holding us back in really critical ways. And it just seemed to me that the intersection of my interests was, a neglected intersection, and that somebody ought to do something about it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you've just been such an incredible force for this, and thank you for that. And I guess, I'll end with this question. My hope is that this is going to be an incredible civic lesson that we're going through about what government actually does. This is a opportunity to restart the conversation for Democrats in particular, to get back on the side of taking government reform seriously and making it work better for people. So that's my silver lining. Do you also have a silver lining that this eventually ends in a place that's going to be better for Americans?
Yes. There's so many caveats to that, in the sense of, what is going to happen. I think I live in the DC area right now, so I'm surrounded by the DOGE conversation. And to me, the shining star of hope is what can happen in the local level and at the state level, because we have to show, states and Dems have to show that we can disrupt ourselves in a responsible way.
Yeah.
And if we don't, we will be disrupted. And it is, as we know now, extremely unpleasant and potentially hugely damaging. So we've got to do it ourselves. We've got to take charge. We've got to be on offense. I understand that there's defense that needs to happen, and more power to that. But we must also be on offense, and we have to show that this is possible to do it responsibly.
Yeah, well, I could not agree more. Thank you for coming and sharing your thoughts today, and for all your work, and looking forward to partnering with you, with state and local leaders to get this done and to be on offense. So thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you. It's been an honor.
An Honorable Profession is a New Deal Leaders podcast. Thanks to the team at New Deal for producing this episode. We encourage you to bring honor to public service, and because we keep things honorable, no tax dollars are used in the making of this podcast.
This podcast is part of the Democracy Group.